Have you ever noticed how the truly wise among us seem to withdraw from the world? Not with drama or announcements, but quietly, deliberately, as if they've discovered something the rest of us haven't yet seen. The wisest people throughout history, from philosophers to scientists, from artists to spiritual teachers, have consistently chosen to spend significant portions of their lives in solitude, away from the noise and distraction of society. And we've been taught to believe that this is a kind of sacrifice they make, a burden they bear for their wisdom. But what if I told you that this solitude isn't a sacrifice at all? That it isn't something they endure despite their wisdom, but precisely because of it? What if the wisest among us don't retreat from the world out of some noble suffering, but because they've discovered that solitude is actually the natural habitat of a developed mind? If you enjoy this type of deep reflection, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like this video. And most importantly, leave a comment below telling us if you've experienced this pull towards solitude yourself, or if you know someone who seems to thrive in their own company. You see, there's a fundamental misunderstanding about solitude in our culture. We've confused it with isolation, with loneliness, with disconnection. But true solitude, the kind that the wise seek out, is something altogether different. It's not an absence, it's a presence, not an emptying, but a filling up. The wisest people don't seek solitude to escape the world. They seek it to discover the world at a deeper level than is possible in the constant exchange of surface-level interactions. Think of it like this. When you're at a crowded party, with music blaring and dozens of conversations happening simultaneously, you might exchange words with many people, but how many true connections do you make? How many insights do you gain? How many moments of clarity emerge? Now imagine sitting quietly by a lake at dawn, or in a room with a single candle, or on a hilltop watching clouds drift across the horizon. In that spaciousness, in that quiet, something entirely different becomes possible. The first reason the wise choose solitude is that wisdom itself requires deep thinking, and deep thinking requires uninterrupted concentration. Our modern world has made this increasingly rare and precious. We live in an age of infinite distraction, where the average person checks their phone 150 times a day, where notifications and alerts and messages bombard us relentlessly. Each interruption breaks our train of thought, pulls us out of depth and into shallowness, out of the forest and onto the path. The wise have recognized that to think thoughts that few have thought, they must be willing to do what few are willing to do, to step away from the endless stream of input. There's a story about Isaac Newton, who made some of the most important scientific discoveries in history during a period when he had to retreat to the countryside to escape the plague. Alone in his mother's home, free from the usual academic and social obligations, his mind wandered into territories no human had fully explored. Would gravity have revealed its secrets to him in the bustle of London society? Would calculus have emerged amid constant interruptions? The wisdom that changed our understanding of the physical universe required the fertile soil of solitude to grow. The second reason is more subtle, but perhaps even more profound. The wise seek solitude because they've discovered that most of what passes for meaningful exchange in society is actually a sophisticated form of noise. Think about the conversations you've had recently. How many were about things that matter deeply? How many explored the mysteries of existence, the nature of consciousness, the foundations of reality? And how many were about sports scores, celebrity gossip, office politics, or complaints about traffic? I'm not suggesting these everyday exchanges have no value. They cement social bonds, they create community, they provide comfort, but they rarely lead to wisdom. They rarely challenge our fundamental assumptions about reality. They rarely push us into new territories of understanding. The wise person isn't arrogant about this. They simply notice it, and having noticed it, they make choices about how to allocate their limited time on Earth. There's a third reason that is perhaps the most counterintuitive of all. The wisest people seek solitude because they've discovered that true connection to others, not just surface-level socializing, but profound human connection, paradoxically requires that we first learn to be at peace in our own company. When we're constantly surrounded by others, we tend to define ourselves through their eyes. We adjust our behavior, our opinions, even our fundamental sense of self, based on the feedback we receive. This isn't necessarily conscious or manipulative. It's simply how social creatures operate. But wisdom requires that we know who we are when no one is watching. It requires that we hear our own voice clearly enough to distinguish it from the voices we've internalized from parents, teachers, peers, society. The person who cannot be alone with themselves, who feels anxious or empty when external validation disappears, will always be limited in their wisdom, because they will never know which thoughts are truly their own and which are merely echoes. Consider the fourth reason. The wise seek solitude because it's only in the absence of constant external stimulation that certain capacities of mind can fully develop. Imagine a pool of water. When it's constantly disturbed by people jumping in, by wind blowing across its surface, by rain falling, you can't see to the bottom. But when all those disturbances cease, the sediment settles, the ripples fade, and suddenly you can see straight to the depths. The human mind works similarly. Constant input, even input we enjoy, even input that seems valuable, keeps the surface of our minds agitated. Only in solitude does the mental water become still enough for the depths to become visible. The Buddhist tradition calls this prajna, a clear-seeing wisdom that emerges not from accumulating more information, but from allowing the mind to settle into its natural clarity. The Christian desert fathers and mothers sought solitude in the wilderness for similar reasons. Not because they hated people, but because they recognized that certain spiritual insights only emerge in the absence of constant social engagement. The Jewish prophetic tradition, too, often begins with retreat. Moses on the mountain, Elijah in the cave. These are not coincidences. These are recognitions of a fundamental truth about how wisdom emerges. You might be thinking, this sounds elitist. Not everyone has the luxury of solitude. Most of us have jobs, families, responsibilities, and you'd be right to question this, but the solitude I'm describing isn't necessarily about spending years in a mountaintop monastery. It can be as simple as a daily practice of silence, a morning walk without your phone, an evening hour with all devices turned off, a weekend without social plans, small islands of solitude in a sea of engagement. The fifth reason the wise seek solitude is that wisdom often requires us to temporarily step outside the consensus reality of our culture. Every society, every era has its collective agreements about what's real, what's important, what's worthy of attention. These consensus realities aren't necessarily wrong, but they are always incomplete. They always have blind spots. They always miss something essential. And to see beyond these limitations, one must sometimes step outside the circle, away from the constant reinforcement of shared assumptions. Think of Copernicus realizing that the Earth revolves around the Sun, not vice versa. Or Einstein intuiting that time itself isn't absolute, or any number of spiritual teachers recognizing that we are not just the isolated selves we appear to be. These insights don't typically emerge from committee meetings or focus groups. They emerge when someone steps away from consensus reality long enough for another possibility to appear in their awareness. The sixth reason is deeply practical. The wisest people often choose solitude because they've realized that the ratio of signal to noise in modern life is frighteningly low. There's simply too much information, too many opinions, too many voices clamoring for attention. In solitude, they can curate their mental environment. They can choose which voices they'll listen to, which ideas they'll engage with. Rather than having their attention hijacked hundreds of times a day, they reclaim their most precious resource, their awareness itself. It's like the difference between shopping at a giant superstore with thousands of options designed to maximize impulse purchases versus shopping at a carefully curated small market where each item has been thoughtfully selected. The wise person creates a mental environment more like the latter, not because they're afraid of new ideas, but because they value the quality of what enters their awareness more than the quantity. Now, there's a dangerous misinterpretation lurking here. The solitude of the wise isn't about superiority or disdain for others. The truly wise don't retreat from humanity because they think they're better than everyone else. They retreat because they've discovered something about the nature of mind, the preconditions for insight, the environment in which wisdom flourishes. Their solitude isn't a judgment on society. It's a recognition of how their particular instrument, their consciousness, functions best. In fact, many of the wisest people throughout history have engaged deeply with society, but in a rhythmic way. They alternate between retreat and return, between solitude and engagement. They go inward to discover, then outward to share, inward to replenish, outward to contribute. Their solitude serves humanity rather than rejecting it. The seventh reason is particularly relevant in our hyper-connected age. The wisest people choose solitude because they've realized that constant connectivity and exposure to the collective mind brings a subtle but powerful pressure toward conformity. Even if we believe ourselves to be independent thinkers, the sheer volume of other people's thoughts that we consume daily shapes our own thinking in ways we rarely recognize. Social media is the most obvious example of this. Studies have shown that our opinions, our desires, even our sense of what's important or meaningful are dramatically influenced by what we see others expressing online. It's not that we consciously decide to conform, it's that our minds naturally align with the minds around us. The wise person steps away from this influence regularly to discover what they actually think, what they actually value, what they actually know, not what the collective suggests they should think, value, and know. There's an eighth reason that might be the most profound of all. The wisest people seek solitude because they've discovered that certain types of knowing cannot emerge in the social self. The social self, the me that interacts with others, that maintains relationships, that functions in society, is just one mode of our consciousness. It's an important mode, but it's specialized for certain functions. Other modes of consciousness, other ways of knowing, require that the social self temporarily step aside. Think of dreams, for instance. When we dream, a different kind of intelligence takes over. More symbolic, more fluid, less linear, less concerned with social norms. Or consider intuition, that knowing that arrives not through step-by-step reasoning, but as a complete understanding. These ways of knowing often emerge most powerfully when the socially oriented mind quiets down. And where does the social mind quiet most readily? In solitude. There's a phenomenon in meditation traditions called cessation, moments when the normal sense of self temporarily drops away entirely, revealing a different mode of awareness. These experiences have been reported across cultures, across traditions, across time periods, and they tend to emerge not in the marketplace or the forum, but in environments of reduced stimulation and social engagement. The wisdom that comes from these experiences doesn't negate ordinary knowledge, but it does contextualize it in a larger framework. The ninth reason brings us to a subtle psychological insight. The wisest people often choose solitude because they've noticed how easily the human ego co-opts even spiritual and intellectual pursuits. When we pursue wisdom in social contexts, something interesting often happens. Our desire for wisdom gets tangled up with our desire for recognition, status, and validation. We want to be seen as wise, perhaps more than we want the wisdom itself. In solitude, this motivation is revealed for what it is. There's no one to impress, no one to think well of us, no social benefits to our insights. And in that honesty, a different quality of inquiry becomes possible. We're no longer unconsciously performing wisdom, we're simply exploring reality as it presents itself to us. This doesn't mean we should never share our understanding with others. It means that the understanding itself emerges more cleanly when it's not contaminated by social motives. The 10th and final reason brings us full circle. The wisest people choose solitude, not because they love humanity less, but because they've discovered a more fundamental connection that's available only when surface-level connections temporarily fall away. In deep solitude, something curious often happens. The sense of separation between self and world starts to dissolve. The boundaries between me in here and world out there become more permeable, more transparent. And in that experience, a different kind of connection emerges. Not the connection of one separate entity to another separate entity, but a recognition of a more fundamental non-separation that was always already the case. The wise don't seek solitude to disconnect, but to connect more deeply to the fabric of reality itself. So what does this mean for you and me, who may not be sages or saints, who have ordinary lives with ordinary demands and responsibilities? It means that if we feel a pull towards solitude, we shouldn't pathologize it or see it as antisocial. It might be the stirring of wisdom within us, asking for the conditions it needs to grow. It means we might benefit from creating even small spaces of solitude in our lives. A morning meditation, an afternoon walk, an evening bath without digital devices. And it means when we see others choosing solitude, we might view them differently, not as misanthropes or escapists, but as people who may be cultivating a relationship with wisdom that requires different conditions than ordinary social engagement. The wisest people choose solitude not because they've given up on humanity, but because they've discovered something about the nature of consciousness that can only be discovered when the social mind temporarily quiets down. In a culture that increasingly values constant connectivity, that treats any form of withdrawal as somehow suspect, that equates extroversion with health and introversion with dysfunction, we need to reclaim this ancient understanding. Solitude, true solitude, entered willingly and mindfully, isn't a retreat from life. It's an engagement with life at a level that our hyper-connected, hyper-stimulated environments rarely allow. So if you feel that pull toward quiet, toward space, toward solitude, know that you're in good company. The wisest humans throughout history have felt it too. Not because there's something wrong with society, not because there's something wrong with you, but because wisdom itself sometimes whispers to us in a voice that can only be heard in silence.